For anyone. There you go. Okay. We've got speakers tonight, but there are no changes to the order. Moving on, we have got apologies from Councillor Upton and Councillor Waite is substituting for her, and Councillor Hollingsworth and Councillor Diggins is substituting for her, and from Councillor Chapman and Councillor Ottino is substituting for him. Do we have any declarations of interest on any applications? Councillor Rowell.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't a declaration. It was just to mention that Diane Regisford is just on her way, so she should be here shortly. But...
Okay, I'd just point out that if she's not here for the beginning of the presentation, obviously she can't take part in that application, but thank you. Let me know. Councillor Fairweather.
Yes, just in the interest of transparency, I feel I should point out that Kevin Minns, who's one of the speakers tonight, is actually lives in the same road as me, so he's one of my neighbours. However, I can assure everybody I've not discussed this application with him, and I will be approaching it with an open mind.
Thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? Thank you. In which case, I'll hand over to Andrew Murdoch, who is presenting the first application, which is the outline application for Oxpens Road.
Thank you, Chair. The application before you today is an outline application for Oxpens. Just before I start, there's a couple of verbal updates I thought I'd just ask you to note. Probably easier to do it now. This relates to the committee report, so just a couple of typos in the committee report. Paragraph 6.2 reference is made to the EIA regulations. This should read 2017 rather than 2011. Paragraph 9.197, the flood risk assessment that's listed there is dated as October 2023, which it should have been June 2024. So just to clarify that. And then in paragraph 10.7, the paragraph refers to proposals, should read that the paragraph 11 refers to proposals that accord with the development plan should be approved without delay rather than saying the NPPF. So just to clarify those points. Also, just finally, in addition to that, we just this moment received a letter of comment from the Environment Agency, quite late actually, just before this meeting started, so I feel we should report to you. The Environment Agency, as you've seen in the committee report, have objected to the application. The updated comment from them has maintained their objection to the development on grounds that they consider it would result in additional wastewater loads to the Oxford sewage treatment works and therefore risk further deterioration of water quality in the Northfield Brook. However, they have stated in this current letter of comment that should the local planning authority decide to approve the application, they would recommend the inclusion of the condition that we've recommended, and you can see that's listed already in condition 17 in section 11 of this report. So they're basically saying that they maintain their objection, but if we are minded to recommend approval, they would recommend that condition going on. The condition in question restricts the occupation of the scheme until the development until a scheme for the improvement of the sewage system to accommodate the additional wastewater flows has been submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA in conjunction with the Environment Agency and the sewerage undertaker. So just to clarify, they've reiterated the imposition of that condition, albeit that they don't remove their objection, but my report deals with that point. So I'm sure you've all read what our view is on that, so I won't go into that again. Okay, turning to the application itself then. The application before you has been submitted by Oxford LLP for the creation of a new quarter within Oxford's West End. The application is seeking outline planning permission for a mixed-use development on the current redundant and or underused land that lies between Oxpens Road, as you can see there to the east of the red line, Oseley Lane to the north, and the mainline railway to the west. The purpose of the application before you is to seek the regeneration of this area to provide a new innovation quarter, which will provide commercial space, including lab space, a hotel, community use space. There'll also be new city centre homes in the form of 234 dwellings, 50% of which are to be affordable, and also 258 student rooms. There is also going to be new public open space, which is intended to include a new riverside space for the City of Oxford. The application before you is in outline form, so with only the access arrangements sought for approval at this stage. Matters such as appearance, layout, scale, and landscaping are all reserved for a later date. So in the event this application has been approved, we will receive what we call reserved matters applications dealing with the detail of those parts of the scheme. The application itself is considered to be EIA development, and an environmental statement has been provided that has considered the significant environmental effects of the development, including the cumulative impacts of other developments planned for and allocated within the local plan. There is an officer's report which sets out our assessment of the proposal against the relevant development plan policies. And so I don't intend to go through all of those issues in this presentation, but I'm going to take you through the scheme in general, because there's obviously quite a few plans to go through. So some photographs of the site. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know the site, but just to help you picture it. So this is a view from Oxpens Road. It's, as you can see there, the ice rink on the left-hand side, and you can see the open space beyond of the car park and buildings beyond, and in the background you've got the student castle development. That's a view looking back on the Oxpens Road over the Oxpens car park, and you can see the ice rink in the background. This is the auto centre and also the former nightclub building, which is currently used as council offices for our direct services. You can see that there, that's on the Oxpens Road. Again, this is a view from the ice rink looking across the car park, which is all part of the development site. This is a view from the ice rink looking towards the mainline railway. A view looking back from the car park towards the rear of the ice rink. As you can see, currently a significantly underused space. And then back towards the council office buildings there, which was part of the former the previous nightclub. This is the area of British Land railway sidings that's to the rear of the ice rink. Again, currently, as you can see, underused. And that's another view of some of that area of land that's currently underused. This is a view from the towpath along the Thames. Another view back from the corner of the site itself, looking towards the ice rink. And this is within that part of British Land, so it's currently being used as a compound for the railway works that are underway. On the left-hand side there, you can see the student castle development, which was obviously brought to committee and developed some years ago. And then also you can see in the background there, the Royal Mail Sorting Office. And that's a view from the bridge looking back, so you can see the extent of the site from Oseney Lane. Another view from Oseney Lane. And then across the site, so you can see the sorting office on the left and part of the entrance to the site, which we'll take you through in a moment. So the scheme's been developed following extensive pre-application discussions with our officers over a number of years, where we've all been talking about how we develop this master plan for this new quarter of the city. Let me just get my mouse up. The master plan itself is accompanied by a design code, which will see the conditions for the reserve matters applications to come forward, so it helps inform the design of the scheme. Effectively, the scheme can be split into three character areas. So we have Beckett's Lane to the north. If you can see my pointer there, I'll try to see my pointer. Beckett's Lane to the north, blocks A1, A2 and A3 in yellow here, which are intended to provide residential development, 234 dwellings, 50% affordable, and that will have an 80-20 split of social rent to affordable rent. Block A2 has got 258 student rooms, which is also going to deliver a contribution towards affordable housing. And then you've got residential in block A3 here. Overall, when you you do the equivalent of the number of student rooms to residential properties, the ratio that you're all used to, the scheme will deliver 337 of the 450 homes in the allocation for Oxpens. It's intended to, the streets here to have a residential character. As part of the design code sets the character area for the streets here, the type of streets we're looking for. And then we move down into what we call the commercial core, which is this area here, which is going to deliver, and this area here, which is going to deliver circa 90,000 square meters of commercial space. That's going to be lab space, some offices, building on the knowledge and innovation economy. You've got the potential for A5 has been looked at, potential to provide a hotel, and community space provisions also provided within here. On the ground floor space, there'll be some food and beverage uses, Class E uses to provide some activity. And then also the scheme delivers public open space in the form of what they're calling Pivot Plaza. So a new public open space with the Oxford Amphitheatre here that links into this open space for those that live there and obviously those that are going to visit there. And then finally, you have what they call, the design code calls the Meadow Edge, which is opening up an area of land that's currently to the rear of the ice rink, which is not currently used for anything other than has been previously car parking. But again, this area of land in the sidings, which is underused, the intention of which is to provide ecological gardens and also an events lawn. And then you have Oxpens Meadow as well, which will be retained as it is currently, albeit there's an enabling application, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the intention is for this to be remained as open space. So the outline application includes a number of parameter plans that are going to set the condition for the development, which the reserve matters application will follow. And we've had a similar approach to Westgate Development, and Oxford North has used this approach and is effective in terms of setting the condition for the outline application that's going to come forward. So it gives us a bit of confidence in what we think development will look like. So I'll take you through those quickly. The parameter plan for this, the landscape and public realm plan, shows the extent of landscaping and public realm that's going to be provided within the scheme. You can see Oxpens Meadow there that we've already got. And then obviously this big area of land here, which is going to be used as public open space. And then we've obviously got the open space within the development itself for the streets. But as you can see, we're creating a large area of public open space that currently doesn't exist for obviously the city of Oxford. The streets around the development are also going to be designed for different purposes, which I'll touch on in a moment. In terms of land use, I've already sort of covered that briefly, but the parameter plans set the different types of land use. So A1 to A3, you've got a mixture of residential with residential or student accommodation. So you've got some, to give some flexibility across the uses, but to deliver the level of residential I've talked about. In the commercial space here, the commercial core, the idea is for that to be commercial lab space, businesses, service uses, likewise A9 commercial. So that gives you the details of the parameter plan about where we identify the different uses are going to go. And then this parameter plan talks about the movement and access plan. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 access points that sought permission for now in full. So you've got what we call the Oxpens Road South connection.
Benefits for children and, like free school meal.
That wasn't me.
No.
Oxpens Road North to connection here, and then the up here in Oasley Lane, which you can't see because of the marker on there, but there's a connection there. It also shows the routes that will come through the scheme in terms of pedestrian and cycle only access, so you can get an idea of where we're looking at, mainly having roads that are going to be pedestrian and cycle only, those that we will be anticipating vehicles to come through, whether that's for some limited servicing or for a primary road that actually comes from sort of the junction with Oasley Lane, Beckett Lane, comes down through here and links past A2, A3 and onto Oxpens Road. And there's also a secondary street that comes through here that allows some vehicle access. Building heights plan, which is really key, which I will touch on in a moment. We've tried to design the scheme in such a way to thinking about what's the maximum capacity they can build up to, thinking about the views into the city, from the sort of the key height and protected view cones that we've got, but also views from outside this inside the city looking out. I'll touch on those in a moment, but the heights that have been set within each of these blocks, we've worked through in quite some detail to try to find something that sits comfortably in that, or sits within the skyline without interrupting the dreaming spires and the important elements of those views, which I'll talk about in a moment. The design code is well set, which I haven't got details of here for you, but also sets the conditions for these roofs to be designed at. So while we all know the maximum height, there are also elements within the design code that talk about how we will design the roofs to make sure that we get something that's got a roof height that's got some visual interest, but also thinks about how it sits in that roof zone. Overall, as you've seen from the report, the section on heritage assets is quite detailed. Just to summarise for you now, that we do recognise there will be a change in the views from this development, and they are coming up quite high in those views. And overall, we consider there'll be a high level of less than substantial harm to the designated heritage assets. But the report has set out that there are significant public benefits that outweigh that harm. So I won't go into those at the moment because you would have all read those in the report. And finally, the final parameter plan talks about the site section. So it gives an idea here of the kind of the maximum parameters of which the buildings will look. Albeit we've got some flat roofs here, that's not intended how the buildings will finally look, because the design code talks about how you profile the roofs to give a bit more visual interest, but it's just setting where we consider the maximum parameters to be within the different blocks. So it's sometimes easier to see the CGI images of what it's anticipated is going to look like. So here is some illustrations of the events lawn, the public open space. This is looking from Oxpens Meadow. This is the new space that's going to be created with planting and the ecological garden alongside the Thames, with a view to creating this as a new open space. So really sort of bolstering and increasing the amount of open space provision that we've already got with Oxpens Meadow, and taking that next step further in terms of a usable space that the city can use, not just the residents and visitors of this development. This is a view looking northwards of Pivot Plaza, and the building in the foreground there is Block A9, which is, give an impression of what we think it may look like. As you can see, the activity that we're creating on here really is to create an open space with a lot of activity at ground floor to sort of enliven that space and make a positive contribution to the city. This is an aerial view, just gives you an idea of the built form. So just to orientate that student castle there now, if you can see on my pointer, these are the new buildings. There's the sorting office. So you can see how the buildings would all sit in, and you can get an idea of the kind of variation of roof form that they will be looking at as part of the design codes to try to break up that massing. That's another view of an impression of Pivot Plaza. I've picked out the ones that I think are probably most relevant to give you an idea and flavour of what the space and place will look like. But we really have tried to help the design and influence the master plan to get something in terms of some good place making for this new quarter of the city. And again, from the Oxpens Road, which we know is currently a bit of a barrier in terms of the development, but you can see this really is about increasing the amount of development on the site to make the most and best use of what is an extremely underused site at the moment. And we hope that the proposals through off-site highway works that are proposed to be undertaken on the Oxpens Road include things like, improving the width of cycle lanes, to try to sort of narrow the carriageways, to reduce the speed a little bit along that road there, widen the pavements, create a bit more of a more humanised space, rather than what you feel like you're walking through a sort of an inner ring road of the city. Just to take you through, finally, these are the elements that are the full access plans. So this is the connection. So you've got Beckett Street here coming from the railway station. That's Oseney Lane. And you have the access into the development here. As you can see, the idea is, although this would be a primary street, is to try to create a shared surface with decent width of pavement, some on-street parking for things like, blue badge holders, etc. But generally the scheme will be car-free. It's in a sustainable location, so it isn't intended to have car parking throughout the scheme, and try to minimise that, albeit there will be ability for vehicles to drive through this part of the site. But you can get a sense of the kind of street we're trying to create. What we're also, the off-site highway works at this junction, we've looked at providing crossings across Oseney Lane and Beckett Street to link in with the existing bridge, which those kind of connections don't currently exist at the moment as vehicles go around there. So creating some crossing points, again, to try and humanise that space. And this is the element of, this is Oxpens North. So that's the first connection as you come down. This is near the sorting office. This is the first connection that comes into the site. Widening the pavement, creating a decent crossover for here, but having wider pavements coming into a shared surface. So even though people are coming in, you make it feel like it's a shared space that everyone's using, and therefore helping to sort of calm traffic, any traffic or servicing vehicles that come through. We've talked long and hard with the county council about how we may improve crossings over the Oxpens Road. So the idea, we've looked at a wider zebra crossing at a certain point along Oxpens Road to provide that kind of route in for people that are coming from the other side of the Oxpens Road, again, to humanise that space. And they come into this, what's a smaller square that's going to be created in front of this building. And then this is Oxpens South alongside the ice rink, which is another route in. But again, it's about creating some shared surfaces, improving the crossover. You can see on here, it's about widening the cycle lanes on the road to therefore create that better link for pedestrians and cyclists. Just finally going through the views for you. Really quickly, the report itself has set out the commentary on these views. If you can make it out on there, I appreciate it's pretty difficult to see, but the blue line shows what's been mapped at the parameters for the development. As you can see, that albeit they will be visible from places like Raleigh Park, the shoulders of the spires and the spires themselves are not interrupted by the development, so we feel it will sit in that middle layer quite comfortably. This is a view from Boars Hill, where the city is on, obviously on the right hand side, the development will be further over to the left, so you will catch views of it. But again, this helps us understand the maximum parameters they could build out to. But again, this doesn't allow for the variations in roof height that we will be working on through the design. Again, this is a view from South Park, where you will catch it behind some of the spires, and albeit you will see some of it, the Western Hills are still prevalent. You can see those, it doesn't interrupt or break that skyline, so we feel it will sit comfortably within that view. And this is a view from St George's, from the Castle Mound. Again, this view and the next one I'll show you, there will be a greater impact, but again, it sits within that area of built form that sits in that middle ground. It doesn't break the Western Hills, and so ultimately, we're seeing it within that zone of built form of the city. This is a view from St George's Tower. You can see it kind of mapped out there. Student Castle is also a bit in the background over here. But here, we've done a lot of work with them to try to make sure we break up the massing of the buildings in terms of where they're sited, to try and still maintain some of the glimpse views. But again, it doesn't break that horizon, and it sits in that middle zone of roofscape that we've got. And that's a view from Carfax. Again, same thing applies. As we've said in the report, we still feel, although you will see it, there will be a high level of less than substantial harm, but the public benefits of what this new quarter is creating for the city, as set out in the report, would outweigh that high level of less than substantial harm. And then that's a view from the Oxpens Road outside the Westgate development. Again, this is just a wireframe. There's obviously a lot more detail to come in, but as you can see where the wireframe is, this really is about making the best use of a site that is significantly underused within the city centre currently. This is a view from the Thames towpath. Again, we will see this built form, so there will be a change, but again, this is about making best use of this underused site and helping deliver the West End, first stage of the West End regeneration. And that's a view from Oxpens Meadow. And a view from Beckett Street. It's sitting comfortably alongside Student Castle. That's the end of that. I mean, finally, officers would advise members that, having considered the application carefully, including all the representations made with respect to the application, including the late representations that we've just received from the Environment Agency, The proposal is considered to be acceptable in terms of the aims and objectives of the National Planning Policy Framework and the relevant policies of the Oxford Local Plan when considered as a whole, and that there are no material considerations that would outweigh these policies. Therefore, it's recommended that committee resolve to grant planning permission for the development proposed, subject to the conditions set out in this report, and also the completion of a legal agreement for the terms set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
That's it. Thank you, Andrew. Now, we've got one speaker who wants to speak against the application, and that's Councillor Lois Muddiman. And then we have 3 speakers in favour. So Councillor Muddiman, you have 5 minutes to speak, and those of you speaking in favour of the application, you have 5 minutes to speak, to be divided up between yourselves. Okay, so it's important that both sides get exactly the same amount of time. So Councillor Muddiman, do you want to come forward now, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I object to this planning application on the following ground. 1, affordable housing. This is a joint scheme by OCC and Nuffield College, and yet we are only meeting the minimum requirement of numbers of affordable homes. This brownfield site is well connected, close to amenities, and will be an ideal place for new affordable homes. We should do better. Number 2, ratio of homes to new jobs. This development will deliver approximately 7 times more new jobs than the housing on site can accommodate. This will increase demand on homes, raise prices, and make Oxford's housing crisis worse, not better. 3, the scale of new housing on the site, referring to Local Plan Policy H1. There are 450 homes allocated to this site, yet in this application we only see 337. 113 remaining will apparently be added later. Why is housing not our first priority? We should be building all the homes first. Where is the evidence that these 113 homes will happen? The land for them has not been purchased and may indeed need to use the ice rink. Where's the ice rink going? Number 4, biodiversity net gain. This is a joint scheme by OCC and Nuffield College, and yet our commitment to biodiversity net gain is again the legal minimum of 5%. We should do better. Architecture. Local Plan Policy DH1 states that there should be high quality design and placemaking. The images you've seen show boring, bland, blocky architecture like the Westgate monstrosity. This is the centre of Oxford. We should do better. But lastly, and most importantly, the flooding and drainage issues. Simply put, there is not enough capacity at Oxford Sewage Treatment Works to accommodate this development. There just isn't. And if you grant planning permission, you are contradicting policy RE7 of the local plan and paragraph 180E in the National Planning Policy Framework. And I can tell you what those are later if you ask. As you've heard, the Environment Agency recommends that you refuse this. That's so important, I'm saying it again. The Environment Agency has recommended that you refuse this, and they are the local experts on flooding and drainage issues. They state that in the letter of the 29th of August, which is in the planning documents, and also they've stated it again in their update to officers today. Their concerns include there is an unacceptable risk of pollution to surface water quality. And just be clear, by pollution, we're talking sewage. There is no information available on what improvements will be carried out to Oxford Sewage Treatment Works or when they will happen. We just don't know. They were meant to be completed by March 2025, clearly not happening. And the Environment Agency do not accept the Council's suggested phasing approach, i.e. kicking this down the road. They don't think that's appropriate, and neither do I. This outline planning permission seems to rely heavily on conditions. that things will be sorted out later in the future somehow. But due to the lack of evidence on the serious flooding and drainage issues, I don't think we can rely on conditions. And indeed, paragraph 5 of the National Planning Policy Framework says conditions must be enforceable. That's planning law. They must be enforceable. And given the uncertainty regarding the future of Thames Water and all of the Environment Agency's outstanding objections, there is a lack of evidence. There is no evidence to prove that these conditions that will be added to this planning application are enforceable. Therefore, you must reject this. Thank you.
Thank you. Can go and sit down again and then the three speakers come forward. Thank you.
It's just me, actually, Chair.
So do you have other people with you who are available to answer technical questions?
yes,
Okay,
yes.
thanks. In case those come up, thank you.
Chair and members of the Planning Committee, my name is Kevin Minns and I'm the Managing Director of Oxford LLP. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you this evening and to explain why you should support our applications to the Oxpence development, which, as you can see from the committee report, is compliant with the development plan and being recommended for approval by your planning officers. You have in front of you the opportunity to bring about a transformational regeneration of this long neglected and mostly empty city centre brownfield site. The site will deliver an exciting mixed-use development of new housing, 50% affordable, student accommodation, workspace, hotel and extensive new public realm with play area space all adjoining the river. This is arguably the most important development site in Oxford, ripe for regeneration since it was first allocated in the development plan 20 years ago. It has required land assembly and is a very complex brownfield site with lots of technical challenges to overcome, including finding a comprehensive and effective approach to flood management. Having assembled a significant proportion of the site allocated under local plan, our aim has been to create a scheme that both respects and acknowledges the rich social history and industrial background of St Ebbs and St Thomas's, but also looks to the future and allows the city centre to expand and connect directly with the River Thames, opening up new spaces for residents to enjoy. We assembled a master plan team of the highest quality and took great care in developing our vision, being to create a vibrant, high-density, mixed-use place, sustainably located close to the historic core and key public transport connections, easily accessible on foot or bike in minutes from the fields and spaces of the west side of Oxford, a new quarter for Oxford. We spent a very considerable amount of time working closely with officers on the master plan for the site, on the very detailed design code and parameter plans, and how our scheme would pave the way for the rest of the Oxpence allocation to come forward in time. We consulted with key statutory consultees like the County Council on Highways, the Environment Agency on Flooding, and Historic England on heritage matters. We undertook extensive public engagement, including 3 public consultation events, and worked closely with key local stakeholders, such as the Civic Society, Preservation Trust, Sendra, and Cyclops. Took them on site tours, made presentations to their members, and wherever possible, responded positively to their comments or concerns. I would now like to highlight just some of the key benefits of the scheme for the people of Oxford. We're delivering the largest amount of housing in the city centre for as long as I can remember, and delivering more than our proportionate share of the housing required at Oxpence under local plan, whilst paving the way for the remainder to come forward in due course as the SPD envisages. Our scheme includes 50% affordable, which 80% is social rent and 20% is shared ownership. That's 117 affordable units in total. We're providing student accommodation to meet the local plan objectives, which brings with it a sizable affordable housing financial contribution. We are fulfilling the requirements of the local plan and the SPD by maximising the contribution Oxpence makes to the knowledge economy, providing space for jobs in the city centre in arguably the most accessible location in the county in which to locate employment. This also financially helps support the ability of the site to deliver 50% affordable housing. We're helping to ensure the opportunities created here are accessible to local people through a community employment and procurement plan and a large community enterprise hub. We are a largely car-free scheme, save for Blue Badge parking and the car club, and will fund upgrades to the surrounding streets to improve walking, and cycling opportunities for all. And we're providing a very large new public open space in the city centre. The Oxpens Amphitheatre, the centrepiece of our scheme, together with sizable new play areas for families, combined with biodiversity net gained improvements totalling 15%. To conclude, Oxpens is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to transform this underutilised brownfield city centre site and bring new homes, jobs, unique public realm and play space area into this important part of the city. We are thrilled to be able to play our part in realising this long-standing opportunity, one that will bring significant regenerative benefits for Oxford. I therefore urge you to support the officer's recommendation for approval. Based on their advice, the scheme is compliant with the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, before we move into questions, I think Andrew's just going to clarify the issue of the Environment Agency's objection. I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify what was said by the first speaker about the Environment Agency, it is not correct to say the Environment Agency have objected on grounds of flood risk. They have not objected on the grounds of flood risk. They've reviewed the flood modelling, they've reviewed the flood risk assessment, and they have not objected on those grounds. In fact, they've recommended conditions to deal with flood risk from the development. The objection is to do with wastewater and to do with the capacity at the sewage treatment works. So again, it's not about flood risk. It's about the capacity that they consider the concerns that they've got, that there is not sufficient capacity at the sewage treatment works to deal with the water risk from the development. And then that is leading to the deterioration of water quality. That is not the same as a flood risk. I think so. Just to be really clear, because we've obviously got an application coming up next, which talks about the flood compensation measures that this scheme is trying to deliver. So that just needs to be made clear, and it's quite clear in the comments of what they're referring to. So I just want the committee to be aware of that.
Thank you, Andrew. If we move on to questions, there are a few questions that Councillor Mudderman raised, and I just wondered if we could perhaps have answers to some of those. One was the proportion of affordable homes and the suggestion that there are too few. And the second issue that she raised was why isn't all the housing being built first as a priority across, rather than waiting for some of it to be delivered when the rest of the site comes forward, and will it all happen? So if we just stop there for the moment.
So firstly, your policy, your adopted policy, deals with the level of affordable housing we will seek from schemes, and that's 50%. It's not saying that's a minimum. If applicants want to extend beyond 50%, then they're welcome to, but 50% is what we expect to see delivered from a scheme, and this scheme is achieving that. So it's providing the level of affordable housing that we require by policy. That's first and foremost, and that is also an 80-20 split. I should make clear that the application as originally submitted was going to deliver a number of first homes, because that was the national policy requirement at the time, which reduced the proportion of social rent that we were going to get. But that's now been removed by the current revision to the NPPF, as I set out in the report. So the scheme is actually now delivering more social rent than we'd originally envisaged when the application was first came forward. So we're satisfied with that. There will be no policy reason to object to the application or compel the developer to provide more affordable homes. In terms of the number of units, we've discussed this at length with them. The allocation across part of the Oxpens site within the West End is for 450 homes. We have to be balanced. We have to create a balanced and mixed community. So there is a need to balance out the delivery of homes and also commercial space. Clearly, they aren't able, the applicant hasn't been able through Land Assembly to get the remaining sites that are currently not in this part of the allocation. So, when they come forward, the allocation will allow them to provide some form of a mixture, whether it's residential or commercial. It's a balancing act that we have to consider, and we're content with that. 337 is a significant proportion of the 450. And we feel that that's commensurate to the level of development that's coming forward. And also, don't forget, this scheme's also got to deliver a significant amount of enabling works to be able to set the condition for that to be developed. So it has to be balanced out, and therefore providing a mixture of commercial to residential we consider is acceptable. But that has been looked at and discussed at quite length, and we're satisfied with the mix that we've got.
Thank you. Okay, can I just point out, councillor Edgersford, I'm afraid you arrived a bit late, and so I will state that you can't actually vote on this application, but obviously you can on the two subsequent ones. Thank you. Okay. Questions, please. Councillor Diggins, councillor Roll.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone who's spoken and presented. So I'm a bit rusty on planning committee because I'm subbing, but it's about the massing. So I've looked at the SPD, which has some comments around massing and how it will need to be dealt with sensitively, as you mentioned. I just wondered some of the views that we were given and thinking about Oxpens Road and how if one of the aims is to kind of create this new public space, whether you've got sort of any reflections on how the massing and the height of the buildings at street level might impact on that, if that makes sense, because it looks like even though there is variation in the massing, they're still all above 70 odd metres at street level, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance because obviously, this is a really underused site. We haven't got, a significant number of sites across the city. So as you've seen from many schemes that's come to the committee, there's that balance between trying to find something that makes an efficient use of the site, but also creates a good quality place. The buildings on the front of the Oxpens Road will be tall. Again, the design code, which goes into a lot of details, it's really hard to put it together for a presentation for you, talks about and looks at how you deal with the top, the middle and the bottom. So you create an activity at ground floor, what you do in the middle section to try to sort of reduce the scale, and then at the roof zone, what you do. So, that will go across the piece, and that will be the challenge through the next stage of the process to try to get something that does sit alongside there. But I think, it's always going to be that this is going to be a highly dense scheme that's going to have a bit more scale. I think we're at a stage where we have to look at that within the city and that be very careful about how we look at it in long views, but also in local views. But yes, there will be a change. We feel the balance is right. But again, it's all in a personal preference, I guess. But in our view, we've been working through that to try to make sure that we create something, new and different along that part for a new quarter of the city that pulls people to it.
Councillor Roll.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks. I had a few questions, if that's okay. But one of was just a follow up on the number of units and housing. I just really appreciate any more information on how that balance is worked out, given from here it looks like a huge amount of space is being put forward for commercial versus housing, even though it's dense. So I'd just be interested to kind of understand more about how that balance has worked out when we know that we need to assign more houses within the whole plot. That'd be really helpful to me. And then the second question I had was on the Environment Agency's objection. And I just wondered whether you could speak more to what happens if, or to what extent the developer or us as a planning authority have control over the conditions that we've put in there around Thames Water creating more capacity to deal with the development, and whether we can ensure and enforce that, I suppose. And then the third question was, I don't know if this is relevant or sometimes we get told this, but I was just interested in the contribution from student housing that would go towards affordable homes. And I know that in the paper it says that comes later at reserved matter stage, but sometimes we have that information, and it'd be useful to know whether a sizable development like this, what that looks like and how much that might contribute towards more affordable homes here or elsewhere in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, taking that. I might ask the developer if he can comment on the issue about how they've worked out the ratios and proportionality. What I would say is, we do have to bear in mind that the allocation for this site, the Oxpens part of the West End, is the area as a whole. So we aren't dealing with a scheme that is dealing with all of what we would consider to be the Oxpens allocation within that West End. So we can't leave out the fact that there are let's call them three plots, I think, left over, which not including the ice rink, but I'm talking about the former garage, the sorting office, and then you do have Richard Gray Court, which is housing on the front, which obviously we're not necessarily touching at the moment. So there is an element that we do have to be realistic, because economies of scale. So you know they're balancing out what the developer is able to get in terms of revenue income from a mixture of residential and commercial, and then that was also played out in the public space that we're also getting and creating. So I think you have to balance all of those issues out. So we have the applicant will probably tell we've kind of pushed them quite heavily to deliver more homes and to get as many homes as we can in this first tranche. But there is a balance to be had. I don't know, before I answer the other questions, whether that you would like to offer anything to that.
I think Andrew answered it fully. It is all about balance. The particular part of the site is where the commercial is very good for that use. They're very deep floor plates. We're trying to create a critical mass of commercial accommodation, trying to create a business district that's part of the West End. So that was very much part of our thinking. And yes, we did get pushed. And yes, we pushed the number of housing units up after a lot of negotiations.
So on the other question, I'll deal with the other point about affordable housing quickly. There is a calculation. We don't have the exact number that to give you about how much we will get from the student accommodation, because it will depend on how much student accommodation is provided within the reserve matter schemes, which is why it does come at a later date. But the local plan sets out what we expect in terms of the ratio and the ratio financial payment. So that's in the local plan, but I couldn't give you that figure now because we will get that at a later date. So we'll, that's something to come later. But again, that's additionality to the 50% affordable housing we're getting. The Environment Agency, in terms of the capacity. So there are discussions at the moment with Thames Water about what they deliver in terms of infrastructure improvements at the sewage treatment works. As far as we're aware, that there's an initial phase that's being looked at for 2027, which would, they say will give us more capacity. But then the long stop of that is if there isn't in 2027, then there's further works to be completed by 2031. The development here, we have got a condition on that says they won't occupy the development until it's been identified whether there's sufficient, wastewater capacity there at the sewage treatment work. So if they don't hit the 2027 date, then we've got the long stop of the 2031 date. But again, that's how we will deal with this issue and this concern. We've taken advice on that and consider the condition is the best approach. What I would say, there's a lot of enabling work to be done on this development. First and foremost, so I think the first phasing of this development is not due to be in place till 2028, I believe. So that would be past the 2027 date. So there's a long period of time that there are discussions with us, the Environment Agency and Thames Water to try to get better understanding around the capacity issue. That's why we think it's reasonable to put a condition on. And those discussions will be underway. So we will have teeth to be able to control that through the because we wouldn't put a condition on we didn't think it's enforceable. So it's within all of our gift to try to resolve that. And that's obviously going to have an impact on wider developments across the city. So that's, I think, where we're at the moment. Does that help? Keith?
Thanks. Simon, Councillor Tina, you had some questions?
Yeah, the public space that you're talking about creating, who would be managing that public space and who would be maintaining it, who would be paying for its maintenance? There's a lot of conditions that have been attached. Are there any that you feel that you aren't able to monitor or you might struggle to enforce? Or are you confident that you can monitor and enforce all of them? And is there there's a time limit on this application, I guess, but if Thames Water do nothing in the next 5 years, will they have to reapply and make a new application?
So firstly, time limit, that we've extended the time limit by 5 years to try to take us, which takes us from now 25 to 2030. By the time we've signed the Section 186 and the like, which we're in discussions with at the moment, so that takes them to 2030 anyway to implement the permission. So we've got that kind of covered. Conditions itself, we wouldn't put a condition on we didn't think we can enforce. And the fact that there are a number of conditions on this doesn't indicate that there are loads of elements that you're trying to rectify and resolve. The provision of a condition isn't, the number of conditions doesn't say you're trying to make a development that's wholly unacceptable acceptable. It just means that these are elements that we would want to seek to control. Also, don't forget this is an outline permission. So we are trying to put some conditions on at this stage in the process that we can use in the reserve matters. So it is a bit different. So, you know, the conditions we think are reasonable, they're enforceable, and that's why they're recommended. The final condition, comment about or question about open space management, I'll direct to the applicant, if I may, Chair.
So the intention is that Oxford will retain the freehold of a lot of the public realm. There'll be a management company, and their job will be to manage the public realm to the highest quality throughout the development. It will be paid for by the commercial users and the residential users to a degree. There'll be a site service charge to make sure it's well looked after. The investors in the scheme will want it maintained to the highest quality because that as well will help with their investment returns. We wouldn't want that to not look like that because it would diminish the quality of the place over the longer term. So we've put a lot of time into thinking about that management company and how that would work and how Oxford can play a role in that over the longer term.
Are there any other questions?
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Some of the, I've got about 6 questions. You want them all at once or?
Well, no, let's take them one at a time.
One at a time, right. Building heights. Could you clarify this statement in the local plan SP1, which talks about building heights of 15 to 18 metres, and also AOC, I think it's AOC1 paragraph 912, which says developments over 15 metres need careful consideration, and yet on some of these there are considerably higher buildings than that.
Trying to go to the policy in question. SP1.
Sorry, SP1 is about the housing numbers. It's in AOC1, I think.
Just bear with me. I mean, while I'm talking, the policy talks about certain heights of development, talks about the policy itself on our high buildings policy talks within a certain area of Carfax, the height that we would want to see from development in relation to 18.2 metres or the relevant height above datum, depends on whichever is the greater. So that sets that condition. I'm just trying to get to, sorry, I can't use the screen because I'm sharing on there. Which bit of AOC1 you're talking about? AOC1's next one up. You're talking about, there's nothing in the policy that talks about 15 metres in height in AOC1.
Sorry, it's the paragraph at the top of the page, page 131.
No, what that says is development at 15 metres will create competition in views from St Mary's, and development at 18 metres will create competition in views from Boars Hill. So development exceeding 15 metres should be very carefully considered and designed in terms of impact of the height.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, so what that's saying is it's recognising that developments in this area of those heights will create those impacts in the view that you'll need to carefully consider. So what we've done through this process is had a look at the heights that are being proposed. The view analysis that I've shown you there looks at the maximum development height that you could get at those heights and looks at the impacts of it. We've carefully considered those. There will be some harm to the designated heritage assets, but the public benefits outweigh that harm. So we think that you can, the need to try to make the best and most efficient use of land. And as that policy is talking about is, look, 15 to 18 metres will probably be, anything under that would probably be okay in those views. But if you're going above it, you need to review that and assess it and have a look at it, which is what the report and what the LVIA has done as part of this application.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. Second question.
Yeah.
This is clarification, really. Under SP1, it talks about the Octoben site having 450 minimum number of homes. I know you've mentioned this before, but are there any other spaces on the Oxpen sites that would then, if they become available, contribute towards that 450?
Well, yes, I thought I'd cover that earlier. So if you look on the presentation, if you can see here, obviously the applicant doesn't control the whole site.
No.
So you've got the sorting office here and you've got the former Shell garage here. There is also the ice rink. There is also this area of land here. So there are other sites that may well come forward. And that's why, in proportional terms, we've tried to look to spread the number of residential uses across the whole site if these sites come forward.
So the 450 number refers to the whole site?
That's the whole allocation,
Right.
yes.
Okay. Third question, and this may be something that's a county issue, but 9.167 in the report, it talks about the Westgate Oxpens Road junction.
Oh, yes.
As I'm sure most of the people here know, Oxpens Road is frequently blocked by queues of cars waiting to get into the Westgate car park. Is this a county issue, or is it something the City Council should be expressing a view of that?
What about cars queuing for the car park?
No, about the design of that junction into the site.
Well, it's not a junction into the site. There's some off-site highway works that are being undertaken to junctions nearby the site to improve access and accessibility. So the element around that junction, which I didn't reference here, is an off-site highway work that's being looked at in terms of providing a wider crossing for pedestrians and cyclists. That would have to go through a separate safety audit with the county council and be agreed through a section 278 agreement.
Right. Fourth question. Parking under 9.213 is referred to as 25 spaces. Is that just for residential use, or is that the whole site?
213.
Page 69.
Direct that to the applicant while I look that up.
Sorry, Mr. Minns, are you happy to answer that?
Yes, certainly am. 25 blue badge. It's 25 blue badge holders for the whole site. So for both residential and commercial.
Is there a figure for office parking?
Chair, it's car free. The development is car free.
Yeah.
Including
The development in its entirety, apart from the blue badge spaces, is car free.
student accommodation. As I'm sure we all know, undergraduate students can sometimes be rather noisy at times. Is this something to be considered at this stage, or do we wait for the more detailed application for the student accommodation to come later?
Well, that would come forward as part of the reserve matters application will look at the actual detail of the student accommodation. I mean, it's not for me to say what type of students you get in there or criticise students. They may feel maybe noisy. Again, this is a city centre location. There's already a big student block there in the student castle, which sits alongside the railway line at the moment, and I'm not aware of any, antisocial issues coming from that development. So there's already students occupying this area. So again, I wouldn't want to assume that they're going to be noisy or otherwise, but we would deal with some of that through a management plan as part of a reserve matters application.
Okay. And finally, is it actually possible to drive right through the site from one end to the other?
Not for all vehicles. There will be a possibility for certain servicing vehicles, emergency vehicles too. But the way the primary street goes through, you would come through the site from Beckett Street, and then you move towards Oxpens Road through one of the the other streets, but there are servicing requirements that will be needed. So some vehicles may get through some of these spaces, but the intention is those would be few and far between.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, councillor Henwood and councillor Coyne.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you've just touched on actually one of my concerns on the site is how do individual flats get serviced? Where do maintenance crews park? There are all sorts of vehicles that would need to. Has it gone off? Okay, did you get the question?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there will be a servicing plan. The streets are designed to allow for some vehicles. There will obviously need to be some servicing for the commercial units as well. So the development allows for that servicing. We will look at that through the reserve matters applications in terms of when the actual physical design of the streets within there get created. But it is, it's car free for people working there, etc., which is obviously one of the aims that we want to achieve, isn't it, from residential properties and also commercial developments, especially in a sustainable location like the city. But there is also a need to have some form of servicing and to provide for that, and the reserve matters scheme will have to bring that forward.
Councillor Coyne, so we can do.
I just noted in the consultation responses that there was something raised by the public health team regarding access and that the requiring some confirmation that there's been liaison. Can I ask if that has happened?
Yeah, there's a section in the report that deals, they asked for a health impact assessment to be done, so that's been done, a section in the report that sets that out and it's been reviewed.
Councillor Roll, you wanted to come back.
Thank you. So it just occurred to me, this might be a question for you. I was just wondering whether you could help explain why it is that Thames Water was unable to work with you to agree like a phasing plan in advance of this, and whether there are any barriers that we should be thinking of moving forward, I suppose. So that'd be really helpful to understand.
I'll come back on that, Chair.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not for the developer necessarily to work with Thames Water at the moment. I think this is something that's, this application was submitted in 2022. So there's been a lot of discussion around trying to shape the scheme and get to a point, deal with things like the flood modelling, to work through that overall piece. So the issues with Thames Water is something that's come up, fairly recently. And so it's something that's a fairly live issue, which probably, in fairness to the applicant, they wouldn't have had time to sort of enter into negotiations with Thames Water. We're still understanding where they're at with that and starting to get to feel comfortable to a point that we can deal with this by condition. So it's not necessarily for the developer at this stage in the process, but there's obviously a lot of water under the to go on from the discussions that we'll have ongoing following any grant of planning permission.
Any other questions? Councillor Al-Tabtar.
I know the height issue has been discussed a lot. Can you tell me whether is it 15, 18 or the another category you said? So where does these buildings stand? You did set the SPD 1 says if it's more than 15, you consider carefully. When it's 18, then something else applies. And there was another number I forgot. But where does this stand, this height of these?
But there's a mixture of heights within here, it's ranging between 20 to 27 metres. The policy, I'm sure the councillor wasn't misquoting it, the policy isn't saying that you can't deliver anything over that height, just that you have to consider it in the impact in the views. Land levels obviously change, don't they? So on this site, we feel that we can, the landscape and visual impact analysis has shown that we can deliver within this kind of height range, and their maximum heights, by the way. Obviously, the way the roofs will be designed will reduce some of the scale of those buildings. But again, it's balancing out the need to try to create a more efficient use of land and make best of, at the moment, what is a really underused site, probably one of the only underused sites in the city centre. So, if we don't make the best and most efficient use of land with it now, when are we going to do it? And so, again, that policy doesn't say you can't go over those heights. What it's saying is you need to consider it carefully. And I'm sure the applicant would say, if I directed a question towards them, they would probably say that we've pushed them really hard to stress test this out quite a bit. And as you know, your officers are quite experienced in terms of dealing with heights in the city centre on a number of schemes. So, you know, we've put that through this and we've put that through that test, and we're comfortable in terms of what we see. There will be harm, but again, there's a lot of public benefit from this development.
Councillor Henwood.
Yeah, I'm just curious how a fire engine would access the block behind the blue block. It doesn't seem to be any access for those kinds of emergency vehicles.
Well, you're going into detail in the scheme that will come forward as part of the reserve matter stage, but you know, that blue block is block A4 or A5, but you've got the Oxpens Road to service it, haven't you? So the that block sits on the Oxpens Road, which is a main arterial route.
I think we're talking about 2 different blocks.
The blue block.
Behind the blue block, the pink block. It does look like there are trees in the lane and road. I'm just wondering how you would get the fire engine to it.
Well, part of the reserve matters where the streets are designed, you'd have to demonstrate that you could get emergency vehicle access.
Sorry.
So this is an outline planning application where the layout is reserved for a later stage. Layout would include the layout of the road. So we would need to see that some of these streets have got primary streets, so there's certain widths to allow certain vehicles through. Then we've got secondary streets, which are going to be of a smaller scale. And then
saying may not necessarily be what's more approved.
well, the layout in terms of the parameters of where the buildings are located, the roads and the widths of them will be looked at as part of the reserve matter stage. And then they will be looking at how they get certain vehicles through there.
Mr. Minns, you want to come back in again?
I could just provide a little bit of reassurance. We've done extensive tracking for refuge, fire engines, ambulances throughout the site to make sure it works. But case officer, absolutely correct. When it gets to reserve matters stage, we'll go into that in more detail, but we're satisfied that that layout in principle will work, but is subject to reserve matters later on.
Any other questions? Can I, Councillor Fairweather raised the question earlier of the 25 parking spaces for blue badge holders, and reference in that paragraph 9.213 talks about car clubs as well. Now, I don't want to start straying into reserve matters issues, but I just wondered in principle what the plans were for car club and for car club spaces.
The idea is that we would have one. I can't remember how many.
Three.
We had three car club spaces. There are several on the streets around as well, so it's to complement it essentially.
Thanks, that's helpful. Any other questions? Okay, I think we move into discussions. Obviously, it's a complicated application. It's an outline application, so there's lots of things we don't get answers to. But I think, you know, I like to think that we've answered most of the questions as far as we can. So over to you now for discussion. Yeah, Councillor, yeah, Jemima.
Thank you. I mean, it was just really a comment on the Environment Agency's comments and the difficulties, well, the difficult situation it leaves us in, again, whereby they are saying that actually there isn't the capacity in the sewage system for this number of houses to be built. And yet we're being expected to approve this application on the basis that they will be, you know, developing, improving their services before the houses are ready for people to occupy them. It's kind of a high risk gambit. And it does just feel very uncomfortable that, I mean, it's a political matter, we know that, but I just feel we do need to comment on this as councillors, that we're being asked to approve an application that actually the Environment Agency have said is problematic.
Councillor Tino.
I mean, we're only being asked to approve it with those conditions on it that take that into account. So from what we've heard from the officers, I think with the extensive conditions and informatives, it doesn't seem to breach any of our policies or any sort of legal thing. That I think we and we can only consider the application in front of us. We can't speculate on one that something else could have put forward. This has been put forward. That I think, having read the officer's report and heard them, I think we do have to approve his application with those conditions and informatives, however sceptical we are about Thames Water. But that is a very important condition. So I sort of suggest that we approve it with those conditions and informatives.
I mean, I think applicants will be aware of the risks involved, given the position with Thames Water, and that will be for them to decide whether. So the risk is on them, as you say, Simon. It's for us to decide whether this is an acceptable application and in line with our policies. Okay.
Yeah, just on the point about Thames Water and what you're being asked to approve, I think you just also have to bear in mind there is a extremely long lead-in time on this development in terms of when people will. The issue is about occupation and about wastewater from the occupation. There is a long lead-in time before this development will have people occupying it on site. 2028. Was the first. In the first phasing plan that we saw, so that may have changed, and it's not going to have got quicker as it's going to go into longer. So ultimately, that we have got a long lead in time. There is going to be a lot of discussion about the Thames Water issue. So I think we wouldn't put forward a condition if we didn't think that was a reasonable way to deal with the harm that's being identified.
Okay. Councillor Diggins.
Yeah. Oh well. It's going to say that I'm Councillor Henwood, but I'm Councillor Diggins. I just wanted to second Councillor Otino's proposal to approve the application. And I just wanted to strike a bit of an optimistic note. I think, I've raised the question about the massing, but actually I think the fact that this is a mixed use application and the amazing new potential that will bring to this corner of Oxford is a really exciting thing for us to consider. And obviously, we're all a bit worried about the Thames Water stuff, but as Councillor Otino says, the conditions cover that, and we can't just sit here and twiddle our thumbs while that gets sorted out. We've got planning applications to decide, and we've got some really potentially amazing things for our city to come forward. And I think what this outline application does is it opens up for future reserve matter applications some really exciting developments that have the possibility to transform a bit of our city and really kind of bring it forward. So I think, it accords with our policies, it builds or it uses the SPD in a way that sort of brings forward a really, I think, what could be a really exciting application, obviously barring all the reserve matters things we haven't seen yet. But yeah.
Okay, so we've got a proposal on the table, but I think that Rosie, you want to come back, and also Lawrence, so I'll let you do that.
Thank you so much, Chair. I was going to say, I suppose the real concern I have is that the Environment Agency have objected to this rather than sort of supported it with the conditions attached. So they are telling us that they object, that we should not do it at this stage. And they've said, if you do, then you need to do what you can, and we agree with those conditions. So I suppose in looking at the application and considering whether I believe this to be a risk or not, and whether it fits and meets the criteria, it currently does not. And I still am a bit unsure about the level of risk, even understanding the extra years and the time that we have in between now and then, and how much we can trust that those things will happen. I know that it says here that it's beyond the 50th dwelling, I think, that the limit of in which continued work could happen. And I'm sort of concerned about there being a halfway, a situation where we end up with a half developed or delayed development because we haven't got this, because the capacity just isn't there. So that's my main concern.
I mean, just to, obviously don't want to keep going back on statements, because obviously they're not questions, but just to clarify two things. Firstly, the condition says no occupation period, so it's not 50, it's no occupation of any part of the development until we've dealt with the issue about wastewater capacity. It's also worthwhile saying this isn't a site-wide issue, it's a city-wide issue, which there is a large discussion piece going on about this. And the Environment Agency, I think, are reserving their position with regards to the impact on water quality. We have done a lot of work with them on the condition to get to a point where they agree the wording of the condition. They've obviously responded to us in the way they have, but we have been doing a lot of work, and there is ongoing work with them to talk about this issue. So it is a live issue that's not going to go away, but we feel that this deals with the harm. But it is absolutely recognised, the issue at hand, and also developers will absolutely recognise that. So, and I think that over time there will be an answer to this. And certainly the condition tries to deal with any harm arising from that.
Lawrence, you want to come back in?
Yes, just to say I'm in two minds about this application. I share the concerns about the sewage treatment works. I also have a concern that we're possibly loading the city centre's roads and other transport with almost another 4,000 or up to 4,000 jobs in the city centre rather than houses. But on the other hand, I'm pleased that there could be several hundred homes provided. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is this development includes a number of facilities for retail. I just wonder whether we're repeating the Westgate Centre, pulling footfall and retail activity away from the central area, which we may come to regret in the long term. And I'm also quite surprised that flooding here is not considered a problem. And yet applications for commercial development along Botley Road, we're always told by various people that flooding is a big issue there. Well, having had a look at the Environment Agency maps, they're not actually very different sites. But that's just a comment on the planning process. So, as I said, I'm in two minds about this one.
On the retail, I imagine it is partly to serve the people working there. And as we've seen since, love it or loathe it, the Westgate Centre, retail has changed. And in the context also of national, international changes of people shopping online and different shopping habits, and places that were shops in Core Market and the city centre are now becoming cafes and bars. So, things are shifting, but it isn't necessarily sound death knell at all. It's just, I think, something different and alternative. That would be my way of looking at it, and bringing a bit of life to and choice to people who live and work there. I think also on the issue of it obviously it is a problematic application, particularly in view of what the Environment Agency have been saying. But we have to ask ourselves, if we refuse this, what happens to the site? It just lies fallow, and nothing happens. So I think that's something that we probably need to bear in mind. Do we have any other comments, or should we move to a vote on Simon's proposal? Sorry, Rosie, you want to come back?
Thank you. I was just reflecting on, so that for me is there's sort of two things. There's the Environment Agency, but also the point around the proportion of housing versus commercial element. And I suppose it's sort of a question to us all that I can't work my head around, is whether I feel like it's maximised the space for housing, given that you'd then be waiting for the other space to open up. So as we were talking about how the alternative of this is going fallow, the alternative of not maximising the space, I suppose, perhaps limits our ability to meet the housing need on the wider site within time. So I just kind of wanted to sort of flip that, I suppose, because for me, it feels like it's not maximised that space, even though I really hear that it's been pushed. Given the size of the development and the fact it's in the centre and this so rarely comes up, that's kind of where I'm stuck at, and appreciate further thoughts because I haven't quite remembered.
Simon, you want to come back?
I mean, I think again, we're only judging the proposal that's been brought forward, and this is what has been brought forward. We're not here to redesign it, are we? We're here to see whether their proposal fits our planning policies and such forth. And I'm just imagining that they have to work out how they're going to pay for this social housing, and that probably comes from some of the other things that they're putting on the site, which is essentially paying for it, because nobody's going to do it for us for free. So yeah, this is a proposal I put forward. We're getting some social housing out there, which would be of enormous benefit for many people who are living in overcrowding and homeless or safe for surfing. And what the officers said, with the conditions they've applied, it fits our policies, and we should support it.
Any other comments, or should we move to, looks like ready to move to a vote. So we've got proposal on the table, proposed by Councillor Artino, seconded by Councillor Diggins, I think, isn't it? Yes. To support the officer's recommendation to approve this outline planning application. Can I see all those, and with all the conditions added? I think we agree. And the legal agreement, thank you. Are we happy to vote on that? All those in favour of the application, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And those against? 2 against, and any abstentions? And 1 abstention. Okay, thanks. So that is passed. Thank you for your contributions on that. We now move on to the associated application with this, which is for the means of access and the highways. And no, it's about the changes to the meadow.
Thank you, Chair. This presentation might be a bit shorter, but I'll just take you through this. So the application before you now on this item is a companion application to the first that we've just obviously discussed at length. The application boundary is exactly the same as the previous application. This application is seeking full planning permission for effectively the implementation of a flood mitigation scheme and the reinstatement within Oxpens Meadow and behind the ice rink, and then the reinstatement of Oxpens Meadow for the demolition of some buildings on the site, provision of boundary treatments, installation of sheet piling to regrade the areas of the public realm, and works to the towpath to allow for outfall pipes for the drainage strategy. The environmental statement submitted with the outline application has considered these works as part of the mitigation measures for the effects of the wider development. There is obviously the officer's report, which sets out our assessment of the proposal against the relevant development plan policies. And so I don't intend to go through all of those issues in this presentation, but I'm going to take you through scheme in general. Some photos quickly. So you're all aware of Oxpens Meadow. This is a view of the meadow looking southwards from Oxpens Road. Again, from a bit further down alongside the ice rink, looking down Oxpens Meadow down southwards, you can see the River Thames on the right hand side. This is a view from the towpath down at the bottom of Oxpens Meadow, looking back towards the College of FE, Westgate, looking northwards effectively. And then these are the areas also that we just talked about. So this is the area of land that's currently behind the ice rink, which was formerly used as the car park for when the Westgate, temporary car park when the Westgate was being developed. Again, another view of that, so that large expanse of space. And then this is the part behind that land. This is part of the railway sidings down towards the river. This is taken from the towpath, but this is part of that railway sidings effectively. So turning to the application itself. So the first, obviously there's not a lot of development in here to sort of help orientate you, but to give you a flavour. So first part of the application involves the demolition of the Formula One auto centre, and also the former nightclub, now council offices. So those buildings are not at the same time. So they're coming out, as you see on the previous photos on the previous presentation. They're not exactly buildings of high architectural interest. So I don't think anyone will lament their loss. Obviously, we're raising no objection to their loss. Then what we come to is the principal element of this, and it's really hard to show you to give something to depict it. So this is taken from the planning statement. Effectively, the intention, the main bulk of these works is to provide a flood compensation scheme. So in terms of what was mentioned just a moment ago in the last item about Botley Road and the development of that, this is a bit of a different condition, because what we're trying to do here is there's an element of cut and fill. So a bit of regrading of Oxpens Meadow there on the, get my mouse on the right-hand side here, reprofiling this to create, and to the rear of the ice rink, to create more flood storage at times of flood. We already know Oxpens Meadow floods a fair proportion of it. So ultimately this is creating a bit more flood compensation within the meadow itself. And then also a small element up here of cutting out to remove some of that flood storage, to then fill in certain other areas to create a development platform that's outside of the flood zone that the development can then be built on. So that's why it's different to other sites. This has come up with a method of making parts of this site developable. And while we don't want to reference other sites, this is obviously through a site-specific flood risk assessment. This has been the best way to deal with this. This has been discussed at length with the Environment Agency, and in terms of how they create this development platform, and this is why the Environment Agency aren't objecting on flood risk grounds. Right, so the next stage just sort of set the scene of the works that are part of this. So following the regrading, the whole area, the whole part of Oxpens Meadow will be re-landscaped to return it to the natural sort of open space that is today, using sort of flood tolerant grassland. There will be a small swale put into the space, but by and large it will be returned back to what it currently is. It's just the profile is going to be changed to allow for that greater flood area. To the rear of here, effectively again, this will be allowed to go back to grass, so that we can then start looking at the landscaping plan that will come through the reserve matters application for the spaces that we've seen on the previous application. And then in addition to some trees will be coming out along the river edge, but there's a number of replanting that is going in this zone, which will provide that kind of ecological area, which is part of the biodiversity net gain, but also creates some of that kind of ecological space, and also maintains tree canopy cover. The works themselves also include the provision. This green line here denotes some of the sheet piling, which will be put in place while we're trying to then build out the rest of the scheme, and before the landscaping works are then put in place for the public square that sits here. And there's also the provision of some fencing around part of the site just to make that safe while some of that work is being done. There's a number of biodiversity measures proposed also throughout this scheme here. So, you know, the improvement of bat and bird boxes along the corridor, Castle Mill Stream corridor and the main river, to deal with any loss of trees, to provide suitable roosting spaces for those kinds of species. And as again, as I said, new trees are proposed within there. Now, these sections are meant to show and give you an idea of the extent of reprofiling. So the section along here, first section here, is running from the Oxpens Road there in the north all the way through the site. It's this route here down there. So you can see the green is currently the area of land. The red line is where it will be reprofiled to. So there's an element of shaving off some of the land just to create that additional flood capacity. And the same goes for, this is the section that runs alongside the ice rink, where, as you saw there, all of that area of hardcore that's down will be removed out to create a shallower area, one for the basin for the events lawn, but also to provide that flood compensation. And likewise, so you can see the reprofiling isn't so significant to really change that character, but at times of flood, it will just allow for some of that flood compensation to be provided there, to then set the condition for us to make better use of the remainder of the site. So ultimately, officers would again advise members that, having considered the application carefully, including all the representations made with respect to the application, that we consider the proposal is acceptable in terms of the aims and objectives of the National Planning Policy Framework, and the relevant policies of the Oxford Local Plan, and we consider as a whole that there are no material considerations that would outweigh these policies. It's therefore recommended that committee resolve to grant planning permission for this development subject to the conditions set out in the report. I've also added in that part of the biodiversity net gain for river credits will need to be achieved through a completion of a legal agreement. There's one for the main outline permission, but we would also need to extend it for this site because there is also some biodiversity net gain and works that are being undertaken on this part of the land. So we would include a legal agreement for this site as well. That's in the officer's report. I just didn't include that in the recommendation. So on that basis, we would ask that you recommend approval of the application itself.
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Minns, do you want to speak again in favour?
Very briefly,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. Chair and members of the planning committee, this application relates to the enabling works required to support the outline planning application we've just been discussing and approved a few minutes ago. The details of this application are clearly set out in the officer's report, but by way of summary, the application is primarily about creating the development platform for the Oxpens master plan through the reshaping of the flood zone and the realignment of levels. But in doing so, we also create the shape and contouring of the Oxpens amphitheatre, which allows us to deliver this unique and unrivaled riverside space for anyone to enjoy, and which forms the centrepiece of our scheme. We have been through a very rigorous assessment by the Environment Agency, who now support the proposals. This includes very detailed hydrology modelling based on their latest climate change requirement to ensure there is no increase in flood risk on the site or elsewhere. In fact, we create quite a lot of additional flood capacity through the work we will be doing. I urge you to support the officer's recommendation for approval based on their advice that the scheme is compliant with the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Jemima.
Thank you. It was just a question of curiosity, really. So when you're reprofiling in terms of flooding mitigation, why then are you creating a lower level? Which also then, a second question was the tree loss. Why are so many mature trees or trees being removed when they're part of our climate resilience?
Well, the idea is to create flood compensation, isn't it? So they have to regrade it out. So to create part of the site that can then flood, which wouldn't necessarily flood at the moment. So that's why they're lowering the land level. So then you can fill up into that zone. Okay. In terms of the trees that are coming out, the tree removal is fairly limited. Again, not high quality trees that are coming out, but again, they're providing a greater expanse of trees as part of the replanting, one which will have a longer term lifespan, and it deals with our policies. And this comes up each time at committee, doesn't it? Our policies we have policies that deal with tree canopy cover. So we don't try to lose mature trees just for no reason, but there might be suitable reasons in which to do so. And obviously that's so the application of tree removal supported by an arboricultural assessment, which sets out why we might wish to remove certain trees, but looks at the replanting to make sure that we maintain canopy cover over time.
And yet, Simon Mosey.
So am I right in saying cut and fill essentially means moving soil around, does it, from one place to another place? Is that what it means? And are you able to show exactly the area that you expect is going to flood? How high above that is the ice rink going to sit? And is this amphitheatre space that you're going to create, is that going to flood as well? Because obviously it floods in summer as well. And what impact that would have on the community use of it?
Well, firstly, the ice rink sits above. So on that image there, that's the run of trees. Sorry, the second one down is the run of trees that sits alongside. So you can see that's all maintained as is. So the ice rink sits behind those trees. So again, we're not going to be lowering land level. You can't just drop the building into a hole. So effectively, the building's going to sit there back on part of the development platform. The events lawn will flood, and that's but that's also part of the overall compensation. But at times of flood, you won't be using the event lawn anyway, because the Oxpens Meadow also floods, so it's unavoidable. You're right next to the main river, so that well area floods anyway. So at times of flood, as the use of the events lawn isn't going to be there, but neither is Oxpens Meadow.
Rosie, do you want?
Thank you. I had two questions, if that's okay, and the first one might be silly, but I just wondered whether you could help me understand. Is the flooding risk due to the proximity to the river or groundwater levels, and does it differ in terms of a mitigation, how you would mitigate if, or is it of both? And then the second question was around badger sets. I noticed that in the paper it suggested that we should consider that the applicant would have to apply for a licence given the fact that there are some badger sets, and that the paper recommends that they would meet the tests, as I understand it, and that the purpose of development, and that is that the purpose of development must preserve public health, safety, and another imperative reason of overriding public interest. And I just wondered whether that could be explained a little bit more, and to what extent the applicant could or should already be putting in place mitigations, I suppose, for harm. That would be really helpful. Thanks.
Okay. First question. Well, it's flood risk from the river, so that's the first thing. Not necessarily groundwater, but flood risk from the river, being next to the main river, and obviously, as it says out in the report, it's flood zone 3, so it's a high probability of flooding. In terms of the biodiversity and protected species, obviously the report sets that out. We've considered that there is a case to meet the test for a licence. Natural England haven't objected to the application. I mean, I've set out in the report why we think it meets the relevant tests. And so you obviously got detail in there on that. In terms of them doing work now, we wouldn't obviously want to disturb some of those any sets or anything like that at the moment. It would be through the application process that would go through, but you wouldn't want to start doing that process now because it's there's no need to disturb them at the moment.
Questions? Lizzie and Al.
Sorry, my mic's still not working. So just about sort of the confidence you have about, obviously flooding events are becoming more frequent generally and in Oxford, and what confidence you have, I mean, without the knowledge to totally predict the future, that this will provide adequate future proofing for worse or more frequent flood events in the near and not so near future?
I'll direct it to the applicant in a moment because they've obviously had detailed discussions with the Environment Agency. What I would say is there's been a lot of discussion about this compensation package with the Environment Agency looking through flood modelling, so they would have used their updated models allowing for climate change. So we would be satisfied that they're satisfied. But again, the applicant might be able to give you a bit more detail around those discussions.
Sure, of course. We went into a huge amount of detail with the Environment Agency. The hydrology spreadsheet they use is extremely extensive, and they use a lot of risk analysis to cover your very point. But the starting point is that they look at a 1 in 100-year event, onto which they add 41% for climate change. Used to be 35%, it probably used to be 20%, but it's now 41%, and that is what all the modelling is based on. This site is actually very unusual in the sense that most of what you can actually see on the plan, the non-coloured bits, are all flood zone 1. It's only the meadow and what we loosely call the scrubland that are at the original Oxford unbuilt level that goes back donkey's years. And that is flood zone 3A and 3B. But the rest of it, the ice rink, all the other buildings are at zone 1. So we've done all our modelling. We've looked at all the hydrology, both from the south, from the River Thames, but also anything that would come from the north, from exactly the same reasons. Checked it all out, went through the rigorous test, spent months with them, and eventually got there and they were satisfied with it. So I think that probably answers your question. In terms of the buildings themselves, onto that design level, onto the level of the public realm, we had another 300 millimetres. It's called a freeboard or a contingency. So the buildings themselves are even higher still. And that's for each of the 9 buildings.
Okay. Other questions? Can I just ask? Oh, sorry. Sorry, councillor Wake, Naomi, please.
You said the events lawn is going to flood in, if there is flooding in Oxpens Meadow. Is the amphitheatre also going to flood in those instances?
Yes, the lower level of the amphitheatre would flood. If you imagine it is literally shaped like that. So the lower levels would flood. So we've had it this winter, haven't we? So the meadow would continue to flood. The Scotland, the amphitheatre would continue to flood for 1-2 weeks of the year, but the rest of the year it would be dry. But the space above it, all the sort of graduated steps, they go higher and higher. It's about a 2-metre difference, you see. It's a big difference in height between flood zone 3A, 3B and flood zone 1, which is where the buildings are.
Sorry, Altaf, you want to come in?
Yeah, I see the time limit on this application like any other application, 5 years. But don't you think it would have been better to have this application first and this work done first and then have the other application? Then whole of this environment agency, they have worked quite in length on this second application, but there was objections on the first application. So don't you think it should have been other way around, and once the flood mitigation is being done, or there should be a shorter time so they get it done this, and then the detailed application should be looked at for the other developments?
Well, you're not, the other application, well, I can't control when they put application in. So the first application isn't a detailed application, it's an outline application. The detail will follow. So they get outline planning permission for the development that they're looking to achieve. This is the enabling works to help create the condition for that. The Environment Agency haven't objected on flood risk grounds on either application. So, you know, ultimately it doesn't really matter when this has come forward. And also, you know, whether you would do these works, you wouldn't do these works if you know, without knowing that you've got planning permission in place for the main substantive development.
Time limit, don't you think this application should be quicker rather than 5 years? 5 years for other, 5 years for this. So it's like very standard. So don't you think there should be some priority for this work to be done as they got the outline planning permission for the other?
I don't think it makes any difference. They're both at 5 years, so they both set the same time frame for when they can be implemented. Doesn't really make a difference.
As Andrew's pointed out, that this work isn't required to protect the other site from flooding. You know, it's a separate thing, because flooding isn't the issue that the Environment Agency has identified.
The only reason this work is required is to be able to set the conditions so that we can get the remainder of this site developed. So ultimately, that's why it's come forward in this order. But the order in which it comes forward and the time limit for the different applications, they tie together. But in planning terms, it has no real bearing.
Other questions? How many trees are going to be cut down? And do we know what types and what the replacement species are going to be?
I haven't got that detail to hand.
Okay.
No.
I think we're ready to move into discussion now. Anybody who wants to kick it off? So I think Andrew's outlined why we need this work done to enable to meet some of the conditions for the development of the site. It will involve quite a lot of work, but it will enable a new public space to be created as well. Okay. no one's got any comments, I think we should put it to the vote therefore. All those in favour of the officers, sorry?
Need to propose.
Okay, I will, in which case I will propose that we accept it. Okay, so we've got proposal, and it's seconded. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation, including conditions and the legal agreement. Those in favour? Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And we move on to our final application, which Hayley's presenting, which is the bungalow in Sandy Lane.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to a property called the Bungalow, Sandy Lane in Fridleys. I'll take you to the site location plan. That's a little bit fuzzy, so I apologise. Hopefully you can see it, but you can see the application site depicted with the red outline there and the bungalow just at that point. For bearings, this is the Watlington Road down here. We've got Liddell at this point over here. And then adjacent to the site are some industrial units off of Harrow Way and some further industrial units, a big one here, accessed off of Asheville Way. The application is seeking full plan permission for the demolition of the existing bungalow and the erection of 12 one-bedroom units, all of which are to be affordable housing for social rent. I'll take you through some photos. This is obviously the front of the bungalow that's on site at the moment. There's an existing point of access to the eastern side that leads to a garage to the rear. Then this is the looking towards the east of the site. Again, you've just got the bungalow and the garage, and then you can just see the flank elevation of the adjoining industrial unit, which I believe is Halfords. And so you can see the hedge along the boundary. The photo at this point here is the other side of that hedge and the flank of that industrial building. Then this is looking towards the opposite direction across the frontage towards the west. And then this is the side elevation of the industrial unit accessed off of Asheville Way. And again, you can just see the site with its access, its low boundary wall and vegetation to the front. Then again, just a similar shot from the frontage. And then this is just giving some context with the properties opposite. As you can see, they're two-storey and flat roofed. This is the existing site plan to the left-hand side of your screen. So we've got the bungalow, the existing access, which I pointed out leading to the garage at that point, and the limited vegetation in the frontage. And then obviously just the existing elevations and floor plan of the 3-bed single-storey bungalow. This is the proposed site plan. So the point of access gets moved to a more central position in the frontage there, leads onto some permeable surface where we've got a total of 5 car parking spaces, all of which will have EV chargers. There's a bin store at this point. We've got some grass to the front of the building, which obviously is here. This shows the ground floor plan. And as you can see, there are 4 flats on the ground floor, and that's essentially replicated on the upper floors. Then there's bike storage at the rear, and that's accessed through the buildings. There's points of entry to the front and the rear. And sorry, just to point out on this plan as well, each of the flats will have either a small terrace, which you can see here, here, there, and there, or a balcony on the upper floors, and they all have use of this shared amenity space to the rear as well. Then these are the elevations. What's proposed is a 3-storey flat roof building, as you can see. We've got the point of access, which I mentioned. These elevations, the one at the bottom is both the front and rear. They mirror each other. And you can see the terraces and the balconies that I mentioned as well. And then these are
the elevation at the top is both side elevations, so the same either side of the building, and these windows serve bathrooms. Then this shows the materiality that's proposed. So we've got a buff-coloured brick, which obviously is similar to the adjacent industrial units. We've got some glass balustrades for the balconies as well, and some grey fenestration. At the bottom, we've got the bike store and the bin store, which are both timber structures. Then that's just to confirm that the first and the second floors also contain 4 flats. And then we do have a landscaping plan, which, as you can see, is very limited. The light green is modified grassland. The shapes at the rear are some new tree planting, and there's also a hedge. However, we have recommended that we seek further detail in terms of landscaping by condition. You've got a fully comprehensive report before you, which goes through the issue, so I won't repeat those. And the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions and completion of the legal agreement set out. Thank you.
Questions? This is a windfall site, so it's not in the local plan. Altaf.
Well, I believe this bungalow is more than 1 bedroom, and it is a family dwelling. So lots of family dwelling, because 1 bed flats can't be a family houses, are they?
But the policy states that so long as we achieve a net gain in dwelling, that's policy compliant. The existing bungalow, you're quite right, has got 3 bedrooms, but we are getting a net gain of 11 units, so that is policy compliant, regardless of what size they are.
When all the family houses goes, and people put 1 bedroom application, so I think there was a balance of a dwelling. I don't remember exactly the policy where you lose the family house, you all provide say 11 new units, but they are not for family.
There is a significant need for 1 bedroom units. There are people on the council's housing list. That is the greatest need, as I understand it from colleagues in our affordable housing department, and it is policy compliant.
The report does set out, I can find the paragraph for you, where it says that there's been a lot of discussion with housing about this, and the reason why it's single bedroom flats, some 2 bedroom flats, is because that's where the need is. Okay, so it's not a loss, as Hayley's pointed out, it's not a loss of residential. It isn't as if it's going to another use. It's going to different, smaller units.
I think the councillor's referring to the balance of dwelling supplementary planning document, which we had years ago, which has long since superseded, where we were looking to protect existing housing stock for some of the smaller scale conversions of some of our semi-detached properties into flatted developments. That's I think what you're referring to, the previous policy. Again, the local plan policies talks about, developments that will result in no net loss of housing. Obviously, this is an uplift, so there's a significant increase.
Lawrence and Simon.
You mentioned public or shared amenity space. Is there any private amenity space?
Sorry, I did mention that as well. So each of the flats either have a terrace. So the ground floor ones have the terraces here, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the ground floor. That's the shared amenity space. And then if I go to the elevations, you can see the flats on the upper floors have balconies, as well as access to the shared amenity space.
And do these comply with the local plan figure of 1.5 metres deep by 3 metres long?
The report sets out that doesn't apply to 1 and 2 bed units. All it states is that they need some form of outdoor amenity space. So again, it's policy compliant.
Difference of opinion.
Simon.
Okay, in 9.2, it says intends to be managed by Oxford City Council, and as part of any tenancy agreement, tenants will be obliged to agree to not bring cars to development. So what are the parking spaces 4, it sort of seems to suggest that other people on the road might use them, but that's going to be problematic, I would have thought, all sorts of problems. So, I mean, are they for residents, these 5 spaces, or what are they for otherwise?
That is a very good point. My understanding was that it would be for visitors to the properties, obviously because that's otherwise the developer has stated in the design and access statement that that would be the case in terms of occupiers not being able to bring cars to the development. Might need to give that some further thought though.
Lizzie.
Sorry. And it says in the report that they're of a simple design, I think is the wording it uses, which I would agree with, but I have to admit, I do cycle down here sometimes, but I'm on Google Street View and I'm looking at the other dwellings nearby, and it says that these dwellings would be a buff coloured, sorry, this is a very specific point, a buff coloured brick. But looking at the rest of the street, it looks like they're more of a light red or a dark red brick. Is there any consideration to the sort of the fitting and in keeping of the design of the new property with the character of the area? And I know this probably strays into beyond the scope, but in line with the question about car parking spaces, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the most efficiently or thoughtfully designed use of the space to me, especially given it points out that actually this is going to be smaller and like shorter and thinner than the buildings to either side. It kind of looks like it. I know the bungalow doesn't really fit in at the moment, but neither does this very well either from the limited drawings that we have.
So the area is very mixed in terms of the building form and materiality. Obviously, you can see from this picture that the existing bungalow is a buff coloured brick, you know, a lighter coloured brick. The industrial units next door contain cladding and a very light buff brick. You are right, the properties on the opposite side have red brick. So we did carefully consider this point. Obviously, the building replacing the bungalow is 3 stories, so we were very mindful of that and it not appearing prominent. So as officers, because we have had pre-application discussions on this site, we felt that a light coloured brick would maybe help reduce the prominence of the building in the street scene and help it blend with this particular side of the road. I think the properties on the other side, you know, they are very uniform and they appear almost in their own context because they don't have the industrial buildings on that side. So that's the reason behind the colour of the bricks, I'm afraid.
I think also to bear in mind on the design, it's sandwiched between 2, industrial units. So it's not, you're not going to see this building in isolation. It's right against 2 large scale industrial units with one that's got a large gable that faces on in front of it, and then the other that's got the curved arch roof. So as a flatted scheme, it will sit in amongst that. We've got other infill developments next to the Greyhound track, which we had, which was the old filling station, where we've got more traditional built form because that's more open and obviously very obvious in relation to the houses. So I think in terms of the design, I think that's why we feel the design sits quite comfortably there. Again, you know, the building's all alongside it, a buff brick as well. So, you know, there are ways that it would help integrate that in.
Other questions? Okay, comments? Lizzie.
Don't know why I keep trying. Yeah, I mean, despite my questions just then, I do think that the net benefit of kind of gaining 10 more dwellings, 11, well, I'm going to give up my maths, a number of more dwellings, which would be for provision of sort of those really in need of a home in Oxford, does seem like a significant net benefit. I'm reassured that thought's been given to the design, and I appreciate the rest of the street it's not going to be totally out of shape because the rest of the street also has a unique combination of buildings in it. I do have concerns about the car question though, and I don't know, I'm not sort of expert enough in how this or conditions work, and I'd be a bit worried about sort of immediately, I don't know, I guess maybe this is falling into another question, but is there anything that we can do about that at this stage, or would that need, because I feel like it is a little bit silly on reflection having visitor spaces that technically the residents aren't allowed to use. I wonder what would be the next steps in that from a planning question. Sorry, I've realised I've totally derailed my comment into a question.
I suppose the short answer is you've got no way of controlling it because the area is not subject to a controlled parking zone. So I think because the site is so constrained, and obviously we didn't want it to be dominated by 12 car parking spaces, there's physically not the space on site. So I suppose that is the compromise. And I think that the developers put forward that as a suggestion to the Highway Authority as a means of controlling the car parking, but actually that will fall outside of the planning system to a large extent. So obviously there will be affordable housing provisions in the legal agreement, but we won't necessarily be subject to those actual tenancy agreements with the occupiers, unless of course the council buy it, and then we might have some control, but again, that falls outside of the planning system. I think, we've got to balance all the issues, haven't we? What parking stress there is in Sandy Lane, and I think the advice from the Highway Authority is that the impact, even if there was overspill parking onto Sandy Lane itself, that the impact wouldn't be significant, and certainly not to the extent where we could recommend refusal on those grounds.
I think, thank you, that's very helpful and sort of cleared up that sort of, niggle in the back of my head. And I think on those grounds and based on what I said before I derailed myself into a question, I would like to support approving the application, but I'm happy for people to wait a second until they've made their comments.
Got that on the table. I think Lawrence wants to come in and then I'll have, but then we'll take a vote.
I think
Rosie, sorry, yeah.
I think Lizzie has stolen my thunder. I was exactly going to raise that question about parking.
On this parking issue, I think from the county is a very short-sighted. If you look at the long term, this Oxford Stadium and you have the Lidl and a lot of things going on there. And if you look at another 5 years, what would happen there? There will be a problem, but I'm not sure what is the solution and how can we condition that for part of the planning.
I think we just have to make a decision on the application in front of us because we can't know with any detail about what's going to happen with Oxford Stadium or other things that might happen. And I think then the issues,
Everybody can see what will happen.
Well, but we haven't got those applications in front of us, so we have to make a decision just on this one, on what we know at the moment. Okay. Unless you want to.
No.
Thank you. Sorry to raise the car parking question again, but I'm just a little bit confused about whether this is intended to, that the point is really clear in saying that tenants will be obliged to agree not to bring cars to the development.
So city council tenants, I think, if it were a registered provider, then they may have other rules.
I see.
Yeah,
that is helpful. Okay, because I was thinking otherwise we're creating a building plus a car park for anyone else. I just wanted to raise a kind of point around the fact that I realise, I suppose is it one place per dwelling when it's not in a CPZ, I think, within our policy.
That's our maximum standard as well, so we have to bear that in mind as well.
Because I was just considering the fact that, and maybe this is a thought for our policy moving forward, that a building of single occupancy that is 100% social rent is quite unlikely to have many cars, if any, perhaps, and maybe cycling is more affordable and more appropriate and likely in this kind of development. So I sort of question whether maybe moving forward we can consider the type of housing and therefore the type of car parking that might be needed for that kind of type of dwelling. But I suppose that our policy is 1 per dwelling, as you say, on max, and that's what we can consider here. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, in which case, get moved to the vote. I think Lizzie proposed it and Barbara seconded it. But all those in favour of the application together with attached conditions? There's accepting the officers and the legal agreement. Yeah. I think that's unanimous, isn't it? Thank you. We're just left with the minutes of the last meeting. So page 159. Page 160. Page 161. 162 and 163. And 165, 166, 167, 68, 69. And that's it. And then dates the next meeting and forthcoming applications for noting. Thank you all.